Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm JÉRôME PETAZZONI, and when I used to work at Docker, I used to go like all over the place in different countries, sometimes in places where I wouldn't know the language. And so I learned how to say, hello, my name is Jérôme, and unfortunately, I don't speak the local language in many different languages. So for instance, I can say, Привет, меня зовут Jérôme, сожаление, я не говорю по-русски, or eu falo Jérôme, and infelizmente eu não falo português, and in a few other languages. And so today I can say, bonjour, je m'appelle Jérôme. Malheureusement, je ne parle pas le français, donc on va faire la présentation en anglais. Voilà. So we don't have 11 tricks, we have 22 tricks because inflation is like that. So I'm JÉRôME PETAZZONI, and I used to work at Docker, but this is over now. I'm a Docker and Kubernetes teacher, which is really fun. I'm not going to say if the fun part refers to Docker or Kubernetes or teaching these topics. I will leave that up for interpretation. When I'm not working on containers, I also do music and tinkering. And so if some of you will be there tomorrow evening at the jam thing, I'll be there with a custom music instrument made with Python and Raspberry Pis and whatever. And now my absolutely fabulous, amazing co-speaker is Tiffany.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Tiffany. Mon français est très mauvais, actually. I'm currently just doing a bunch of conferences. If you want to see what other talks I'm giving, including one tomorrow with my friend Matthias on observability, you can go to my website over there. If you're hiring for DevRel, come talk to me. And also Twitter, X, and whatnot. So, yeah. Okay. So who here has run Kubernetes locally? OK. So some of these may look pretty familiar to you if you have before. And if not, maybe there's something new on here. But basically, there's a ton of options there. A lot of times, you may, when you're maybe just wanting to play around with something, you don't want to go and pay money to some other service that has a managed service and paying money for that versus just trying to run it locally. So you could use things like Kind, Minikube, Ranger's Desktop, OrbStack, et cetera. There's just a bunch of different things out there to be able to run it locally. So who here knew that you can actually use Kind with having multiple nodes?
I see, we're going to teach them a few things today.
Cool, OK, yeah. So until Jérôme told me this one, I thought you could only have one. It's pretty useful if you want to do things like affinity, anti-affinity, tolerations, et cetera. I already went and just created it. We'll be doing demos, things here and there for various of the different things we're going to be showing. Not everything, because, well, 22 is kind of a lot, and we have 30 minutes.
Well, she'll be doing demos. I don't know if I will be doing demos because demos are complicated. And I don't know if I can be trusted with a Mac. But
he also doesn't speak French. OK, so who has heard of CubeColor wait? OK, a few people. So basically, say if you are trying to create some resource, whether, say, it's a deployment, for instance, it usually just finishes, and you're like, oh, hey, cool, my deployment's up and running. But it actually isn't necessarily already up. So there's CubeColor wait, which can help you wait for some sort of resource to be up. So this you can use it, for instance, on nodes. If you are adding, say, new nodes to your cluster, I'm not going to show this for this one because my Kind cluster is already up. Also, with Kind, you can't actually go and do a wait on the nodes until the cluster is fully up. So it doesn't really help so much there. But this can be super helpful for like if you're doing testing, et cetera, and making sure that the resource that you want is already up before you try doing something with that. So who has heard of kubectx or kubeNS? OK, a lot more people. All right, so yeah, basically, there are tools that make it easier to be able to say, hey, I want to switch between my Kubernetes clusters, switching with the context, or hey, I want to go and switch between my different namespaces, and instead of doing a kubectl-n of your namespace for, like, say, 20 different commands you want to do, you can just do kubeNS for that and no longer have to deal with that. So if I were to just like go here, if I did kubeNS, we can see that I have several different namespaces, and if you install another plugin with it, you can be able to just jump between the different ones. So I'll just stay in default. And can everyone see the text well enough so far? OK, cool. And then, yeah, if I did kubectx as well, same type of thing. You can see, like, I had OrbStack, I have Kind, I have Docker Desktop, and a bunch of defunct DigitalOcean clusters that I no longer have up and running. So, yeah. OK. So now let's go and actually create some stuff. So I'm just going to do the typical creating a deployment, and then basically waiting for it to be available. So if I do a create deployment, oops. What did I do wrong here? There we go. OK, so K is just my lazy way of not typing CubeCuddle. It's especially useful if you're trying to do something like the CAA or the CCAD, so that you don't have to deal with that. But it's already going to be up and running. But if I just did a wait for a deployment, I can, oops. I added a new plugin that basically makes it so that I can fill out the rest of what I'm typing, and I'm not used to having it since I just added it a few days ago. I'm used to the fact that it shows it means I can actually do that, but no, I actually have to tab over, or it doesn't actually do anything. OK. And now it doesn't like me.
Well, I think it's maybe pulling the image or something like that. Since I think you created the cluster.
Question is whether I'm still on the hands-on labs Wi-Fi, which probably is not the best at the moment because that's from a different room. All right, we'll see what happens. OK. So basically, there's a bunch of different conditions that you can wait on. If you run this command here, it will be able to tell you some of the different things for, say, a deployment. You can say, for instance, I could check here, well, it timed out. But basically, for instance, the fact that here's the condition is available, and then there's other ones that you can also get as well. And so, if you were hey, I want to wait on a replica set for some, and checking for that, etc. So you can also do this type of thing for waiting. So say if I did an expose, so if you're hey, here, let me create this service, and then you can go and just wait for the endpoints to be up and available. So basically then you know, hey, my service is up. You can also do this if you have a load balancer. So it's just you're checking both for the endpoints and also for the service, which this can be super useful, especially if, say, you're creating some load balancer running in some sort of cloud provider, and you don't want to be just checking constantly, hey, is this up already? You can be able to go here and just be able to have it wait on that.
This is going to be super useful in CI/CD pipelines or anything like that when you need to wait until the thing is actually up before you can continue. So sometimes you want to know, okay, are my pods really running? Are my deployments really running? So that's where conditions are great. Fun stuff, if you are writing your own custom resources, you can have your own conditions there. So if you make a custom resource pizza, which is what I use when I teach CRTs, you can have a condition baked or overbaked or cut or whatever, and you can wait for these conditions to transition to something else. And for load balancers, now it's a little bit different because for load balancers and services, you won't have conditions. So you need to be okay, well, I need to wait until something is available or whatever. So one option is let's just curl that thing until it responds. But if it's not HTTP, then you need to come up with something else, etc. So that's where we have these examples. So one of them, we actually do a wait on the endpoints, right? So endpoints, it's something that comes with services. When you create a service hello, then there is a endpoints hello, and the endpoints of the service will contain the endpoints of the service, which is not really helpful when I say it like that, but it's literally that. When you have a service, you have multiple endpoints corresponding, for instance, to the pods that are behind that service, and you can basically wait on these endpoints to show up. And the kind of cool stuff that, out of curiosity, so we didn't have many people who raised their hand to say they knew about kubectl wait, but did you know that you could wait on a JSON path expression on kubectl? Not many people know that because it's a relatively recent thing. I would say less than 2 years ago. So it's a kind of stuff if you're kind of new to Kubernetes, probably nobody told you. And if you're like me, like old and frail, then you've been knowing Kubernetes for too long in a way, so that thing didn't exist back then. So then you're like, wow, cool feature. So that's an example of what you can do. Same thing when you provision a service of type load balancer. You typically it takes some time. On some cloud providers, it's seconds. On some cloud providers, it's minutes. And there again, it's like, what am I gonna do? Like, I'm thinking about doing some little for loop with a sleep or whatever. No, we have civilized ways to do that.
Yeah, and this is one that, for example, for just like checking for a deployment, you can see that there's available and progressing. But basically, this is even if you're not specifically using a script, instead of having to manually do a like get deployments, get all, and just like hit up and then like wait for it. Obviously, there's other ways that we can go about doing this, but instead of having to do things like that.
And it's important to look at these conditions because, for instance, for deployments, it's available, but for pods, it's ready. Yeah, sorry, it's kind of like that. There was maybe a lack of coordination between some folks in the Kubernetes core team, but that's the way it is. And so it's great to have a look at which conditions are available. What do we have next? Do you want to talk about that, or should I talk about that?
I can talk about it.
Sure.
So basically, you can change the timeouts. Like, for instance, we saw that with my slow internet from another room that I ended up hitting a timeout. So basically, you could do things like you could have it 0, where basically it'll just go and check it once. You could have a negative value. So if you have something that takes you an entire week, you could do that. There's also, you can do a wait for a delete also. But basically, you can change it around depending on what kind of time that you might need. Maybe if you have really slow internet, you might need more time, and you want it to actually wait a little bit longer for that. Again, hopefully not an entire week. But. Oh, and also the QR code on the bottom of all the slides are for the slides.
Yeah, slideception.
Okay. So basically, if you are like using, those are some ways that you can use CubeColor and kind of just waiting on resources and such. There is also a tool called CAP. Who has heard of CAP or the Carvel tool suite?
No one.
Okay.
Absolutely no one. Okay.
So I don't remember what stage it is in, but it's part of the CNCF landscape. There's a bunch of different tools in there. CAP is one of them. So basically, there's a couple things that help make it be fairly useful, where, say, if you're using CubeColor and you do -f with a file that has a bunch of different resources in it, and then maybe you do that again in the same namespace, and later you're like, oh, I still have this stuff running, but I only want to delete specific stuff to this one application. If you don't know where the file is to delete it, or if you didn't label it, you might have a hard time. So one of the things with CAP is it will go and do labeling and all those things, where each file that you give, you create an application. So basically, if I were to just like try running it here, I have a YAML file that basically just has a deployment and a service. And so here it will actually go and wait, and I'll just hit yes and I'll kill it because we don't need to run the whole thing. But basically, you can see that it's actually going through and waiting for all the different things to come up. And then if you make changes, you'll be able to see an operation that will show that things are being changed.
Cool. So this is another thing that I use actually more often when I teach Kubernetes and explain it, rather than in production or for actual, like serious things. But when you want to see exactly what's going on, I'm sure many people know about kubectl get --watch. But the --output watch events adds an extra column to tell you, oh, this resource just got created or modified or deleted. So that's pretty convenient. Another thing is that when you do a kubectl get --watch, you can put a -o JSON, and then you get a kind of a JSON stream of the stuff happening to your objects, and you can actually use that to write a controller with bash scripts. Should you? I don't know, but you can. What else?
So yeah, basically, like if we had that, if I were to do a restart, if we go back over here, we can actually see everything that's getting deleted and created.
Conceptually, it's a little bit like a tail -f. So you're going to see all the stuff that happens to the resources, and it's great to understand like what's going on the cluster. Then we have, yeah, so if you want to see what's going on, there is that tool called K9s. Do we have some K9s fans here?
Technically canines.
K9s, yeah, okay. So a bunch of people, okay, that one is pretty well known. So that gives you a text user interface kind of like this, which is great because you can quickly see that we have a bunch of pods in error and some that are completed, etc. So pretty convenient if you don't like the CLI that much, but don't want to commit to dedicating 4 gigs of RAM for an Electron app. Now, who here doesn't like rainbows? Okay, that's what I thought. Everybody likes rainbows, right? Rainbows are awesome. Colors are awesome. And so that's why you should use CubeColor. CubeColor is something that kind of not exactly replaces, but wraps kubectl. So you can do stuff like this. You know, when you do key get pods, you have some nice colors that help you to quickly see, oh, this thing is pending, this thing is running. Just one little thing. If, like me, you're kind of weird and often have black on white and white on black terminals, then you will need to mess around a little bit with the environment variables. Otherwise, the choice of color is going to be a little bit weird. But there is a way to work with CubeColor if you have bright and like black terminals. So that's great. Okay, now sometimes we need to read the docs, and honestly, you should read the docs and you should even write the docs. Docs are important and we should love them. I won't have everyone chant after me, we love documentation and we will document our code, but because I don't think it would work, but if I had the power to do it, I would. But sometimes we don't have the docs for various reasons. I'm going to give you one reason that might sound a little bit ridiculous, but my brain works in such a way that sometimes if I need to go look something up in the documentation in a website, I'm going to be distracted. And so if I'm trying to get stuff done, sometimes I would like to have a way so I can stay in the warm comfort of the command line and not go into the dangerous browser with all the murk and garbage of social media and whatever. So we have kubectl explain.
Yeah, so first off, like if you maybe are trying to figure out, hey, what are the different resources that are out there and where are they located? So, and what's the API version, et cetera. You can get that from just kubectl API resources. So basically, especially with like doing the CCAT, et cetera, you might need to be like, hey, I need to put in this field, but I don't know where it actually goes. Instead of spending all the time looking up in the docs, you can just do a kubectl explain. So like, for instance, I could do that on a deployment. You can see the different fields that are there. You can also do a -- recursive, and then you can actually get the whole entire YAML for everything that you need for that.
Also pretty convenient if you remember, like, oh, I remember there is something called like persistent volume claim, but I don't remember exactly where it goes in the manifest. You can do this explain -- recursive, whatever, pipe, grep, persistent volume claim or less or whatever, and find exactly, okay, that field is that deep in the YAML thing.
But basically, if you were trying to create an entire like YAML file for something, doing this might be kind of a pain. Maybe you wouldn't want to go copy paste that and try getting rid of things that you don't actually care about that have defaults, etc. So who here knows how to create a YAML manifest without having docs and without doing what I just did? Or we just kind of did.
A few very shy hands. Okay.
Okay. So basically, you can actually, who here has used Kubernetes before? Okay.
Yeah. Many hands. Okay.
Cool. All right. So basically, you could just do your typical like create whatever the resource is, and then you can, if you want YAML, for instance, you can do -o YAML, and then there's this thing with dry run equals client, so it doesn't actually go and create the resource, but basically it'll end up giving you YAML for it.
And you can also use that for ingress and, I don't know, like role binding. Okay, namespace and service account are less exciting, but there we go, a deployment YAML. Yeah,
so basically this is just like if you were to go to the internet and be like, hey, give me a YAML for an Nginx, and then basically for a deployment for that. And now you don't have to go do that. And you can just paste this into some file and make whatever changes that you want. There's some plugins that you can also get to get rid of some of the default things that you may not care about, for instance. Okay, so right now, let's just make sure that we still have our deployments up and running. So yeah, we have the one that we just that we start up. So who here has heard of CubeColor patch?
Okay.
Okay, so basically you can go and give it some sort of YAML. So right now, the deployment that we have, it's just running Nginx. The image is Nginx and the name is Nginx. So what we could do is we could try doing this patch. Who here thinks that it will result in modifying the name and image for the deployment? Okay, who here thinks that it will result in there being 2 containers? Okay, so
and everyone else, I think they're confused.
Okay, yeah. All right, so okay, let's take a look real quick. So if we do KKey get deployment, and if we do hello, and if we do -o YAML. So if we look here right now, we have a container, and it has an image Nginx, and the name is Nginx. So if we were to go and do this patch, okay, so if we run, oh my goodness, I will eventually get this. There we go. If we run this, we have that patch. If we go and take a look here at this YAML, basically, we now have 2 of them.
2 containers. It's like Jesus multiplying containers.
So basically what happened here is like it's paying attention to what it needs to have a name. And based on the fact that it is a different one, it ended up adding another one. If you ended up using the same name, then it would go and just replace that image. So obviously we didn't do this right for what we wanted. Mistakes can happen. So we can go and actually remove it.
And if that whole thing was a little bit confusing, but you feel like, I want to learn more about this, the keywords that you need to put in your search engine is like strategic merge key. It's not the password for a speakeasy or something, but it's because what Kubernetes does in that case is a strategic patch, and there are merge keys in these, and that's what you want to be looking for.
So if we look here now, we have fixed the problem. We no longer have 2 of them there. But basically, if you make a mistake in this case, it is not necessarily the end of the world. So there's another way to go about doing this where you're less likely to make that thing happen. There's other mistakes that can happen. So basically, you could use Cuddle Set. So instead, I could just set it for Nginx equals Nginx Alpine, and then that will go and change the image there. You could do that with a service account. So you have to be careful, for instance, like if I were to run that right now, I don't have any service account named my service account. So then anything that you had applied that to, so this one luckily is just on the deployment hello, it will obviously start failing. And the other one that was just run with having the 2 Nginx pods, that would also be the issue with that one. Besides the fact that you didn't want to, is that they're both trying to share port 80, so then it's going to end up having issues. But you can do that with saying like setting memory and CPU limits as well. Basically, there's just a bunch of different things. You can use Cuddle Set env and then just kind of see what different things that you might want to be doing that with.
All right. What do we have next? Oh, label columns. So that one is pretty convenient just to add a couple of extra kind of custom columns to a command. So this is an example where I'm like, I want to see what kind of CPUs and instance types and in which zones my nodes are running. So you just add these options. Maybe you want to put that in an alias or a shell script or whatever, and boom, you have these extra columns. So pretty convenient. This one is because one day somebody asked me, how can I know like this pod, like who or what created that pod? Is it a pod belonging to a replica set, to a daemon set, to whatever? So I scratched my head a bunch and I came up with that command. So we use another form of custom columns and we go into the owner references, which tracks basically who owns that object. And so there we go. Now it tells you who owns the corresponding pod, like who created it. You can also have little tweaks around that to see the pods that don't have an owner, for instance, to see like, orphan pods that wouldn't be recreated automatically if an outage were to happen. Did I skip something? Oh, no. Okay, good. All right, so now, sometimes when you care about security, the first thing you can do is check Tiffany's talk from last year, because she did a pretty comprehensive intro about cloud-native security and airbag on Kubernetes. It was actually 2 different talks. The other thing you can do if you do some pen testing on Kubernetes is a command like this, which is going to show what permissions you have. And at first, this can be a little bit confusing, like what are all these things, but basically, you know, all the first lines are the really interesting bits, and then like all the get on the right, this is just a bunch of kind of blanket standard permissions, but that's kind of interesting when you do that on a service account, and suddenly you realize, oh, this thing has permission to, I don't know, create ingresses and also list secrets. Oops, it can list secrets. It shouldn't be able to do that. So that's a pretty good way to see what a user or service account can do on Kubernetes without having to completely explore all the roles and role bindings that exist.
Bring, bring.
Hello, IT.
Hi, my pod's not podding.
Did you try turning it off and on again? OK, so sometimes pods are not podding. And so in that case, you can try to call Kubernetes IT, but they're probably not going to be very helpful. But what you can do, though, is what we say restart pods. So there is this super convenient command, kubectl rollout restart. And what it does technically is that it's going to put a small annotation in the pod template, which means it's going to do a rolling update, exactly as if I had changed the image in my deployment. But instead of changing the image, it changes the annotation. So it's not really going to change anything in my deployment, but it's going to recreate every single pod and effectively restart the thing. And yet there is that little annotation here. Okay, sometimes we really want to turn it off and on again, like completely off and wait until it's like really quiet and then turn back on. And we can do it like this, scale down to 0 and then back up. Yeah. And you're scaling back up. Yep, there we go. Now, sometimes you could wonder what's the point of scaling down to 0 exactly. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Sometimes when I debug production stuff, which I really shouldn't do, you shouldn't trust me with your Kubernetes credentials, but sometimes I'm going to scale something down to 0 because I want to stop maybe that bunch of workers or whatever. But I know I will have to restart them after, and I don't want to delete them, because if I delete that deployment or that job or that whatever, then I won't be able to recreate it after. But if I scale down the deployment to 0, then when I'm done trying to fix things or not making them worse with my shenanigans, then I can scale back up. Another really good example of scaling down to 0 is to save money. So for instance, you might have some event-driven architecture where you have a bunch of jobs, messages sitting in a queue, and then you have some workers consuming from that queue. And basically, when you have no message sitting in the queue, you would like to have no worker running, especially if those workers are using GPUs, because GPUs are expensive and you don't want to pay for them when you don't need them. If you're interested by that kind of stuff, I recommend that you check out KEDA, K-E-D-A, because it's a custom autoscaler, which is extremely cool and also not too complicated to set up. I'm looking at you, Prometheus adapter. Now, this is an example that we're not going to go through entirely, but it's just like sometimes you need to connect to a service which is in a different namespace, but you want to pretend it's still in the same namespace. You know, like in the code, you connect to like DB, so you expect the DB service to be in this namespace, but oops, in fact, it's in a different namespace. What can we do? This is a creative use of external name to make an alias to a service in a different namespace. I think that's pretty cool. This one, my partner taught me that one last year. So the Gron is super cool. It takes like a JSON document, and it's going to turn it into a kind of flat format. So then you can use tools like grep and sed and whatever, and then you can turn things back into JSON. So sometimes you're like, hey, I have this JSON and I want to transform like this particular key or remove it or whatever. And there are some tools to do that, but they are way too complicated for my small brain. Grun is really easy to use because it turns into a kind of line-oriented thing, and then I can use grep and stuff I learned like 20 years ago in college, and so that's more comfortable. Another thing, when you're trying to do, so again, like save money, some FinOps, view utilization, super great. I mean, not on huge clusters with 200 nodes, but on small clusters like many normal people use, that gives you a pretty quick view of the resources that you have, of how much is used, and where you could trim some slack, basically.
Who here has heard of Nixer? Okay.
Nobody?
So,
wow, cool. No, this is awesome. You're all going to learn something super cool.
Okay, so basically a lot of times maybe you have like a Docker file and you're starting with some base image, but you're like, well, oh no, I don't have curl. Okay, well, I'll go find a curl image. Well, I also want CubeColor. I also want X other thing. You can't do it with every single tool out there, but like for instance, this one here, you're basically creating an image that has shell, it has CubeColor, it has curl and JQ, and then it has everything there, and you can just maybe build it as your own, like push it up to your registry, and you'll always have that. So that's super, super neat. There's a few caveats. If you want it to be like ARM64, you need to just add that in there. You can't have multi-architecture images yet. Yeah, basically they're AMD 64 by default, but just super useful if you're like, I need these tools and I want to run them with that.
And the last thing, because we are now out of time, and so there is a little red light that blinks here, and soon it's going to kind of show up on my forehead here to terminate that talk. And so I want to tell you about termination message policy. So this is something that's been in Kubernetes for a while, and I had never heard about it. Anybody heard about it or used this ever? Like no one? Okay. So this is, when you do a kubectl describe on a pod, for instance, when the pod died, it's just going to tell you error, and what happened? Well, you don't know. It's just error. It died. So then you need to go and look into the logs. But there is a thing, so the termination message path, which is something weird like /dev/termination log or whatever, and you can actually write something in that file, and it's going to show up in kubectl describe. And if you don't want to refactor your code and your things to write into some super weird /dev file that nobody cares about, you can change that termination message policy. And what that does is basically when the pod crashes or something bad happens, it's going to take the last few lines of output and put them in the error result in kubectl describe. So now when you do a kubectl describe, you can see the last few lines of logs of that pod, and I think that's pretty cool. And I think we're going to wrap things up on that. But first,
so if you want to hear about observability, things like service mesh, eBPF, OpenTelemetry, etc. Matthias and I have a talk tomorrow morning after the keynotes. There's the QR code if you want to see what the talk is about. Please come join us. And yeah, so thanks. We're not hiring, but you can hire us. So there's our info. So thank you.
All right, I believe we're out of time for questions, but we're going to stick around until they send the police to kick us out. And so if you want to ask things about getting started with Kubernetes or getting done with Kubernetes, which French would be, je peux vous expliquer comment démarrer avec Kubernetes, mais aussi comment en finir avec Kubernetes. And on that, enjoy the rest of your day at this wonderful conference. Thank you.